have an interesting conversation on sustainable electronics. Now, I think all of us know that there is an exciting time for ICT and communications in India. The sector is poised for immense growth. Whether we look at the rapid digitization, whether we look at the manufacturing impetus, Make in India schemes means that the sector is going to leapfrog. Now, against this, I think it's very, very important that we look at a sustainable growth of the sector. Increasing consumption, quicker upgrades does mean that the rising e-waste is a huge problem. Now, the good thing is that we do have policies, we do have regulations that are looking to address this problem, but I think a lot remains to be done. And at the same time, when we look at e-waste or when we look at sustainable electronics, there is also an opportunity to look at resource recovery. We don't always have to use virgin materials. And when we look at resource recovery, there are many materials, many metals that we can recover, but one element that is also equally important is plastic. Now, I'm told that about 20% of the e-waste is actually plastic. To have this important conversation on how we can look at better recycling, recoverability, how do we manage the plastic stream flows, plastic flows in the whole e-waste management conversation. We are joined today by Ms. Shobha Raghavan and Mr. Sean, and we look forward to this conversation. But just before I introduce Shobha and I introduce Sean, who joins us from across the world, early morning for him, we would like to take an opportunity to play a short video because we are having this conversation against the Harit Prem Bharat Mahotsav, a great initiative in the memory of Dr. Prem Jain. And we would just like to take this opportunity to play a small video in his memory. So I'm going to request my colleagues here to just play the video before we start our conversation. Sia, over to you.
Thank you, Devyani. Give me 1 second so that I can.
The world is at crossroads as far as the safety and well-being of our ecosystem is concerned. With rampant urbanization, environmental degradation, and grave consequences of climate change, an overall path correction has become imperative to the existence of all living forms on Earth. Should we continue with the abuse of our precious natural resources? Should we use technology and innovation to conserve them? Can we reduce energy usage with a mindful approach and renewable sources? Dr. Prem Jain anticipated many such challenges we are facing today way back in the 70s. Over half a century of dedication and tireless efforts, he thought and spoke a language that was way ahead of its time. His passion and commitment to his Janmabhoomi and to his own mother ran equally deep.
From my earliest childhood, it's been ingrained with me that truth will always win, what we call Satyamev Jayate. She also gave us the love for all living living creatures, trees and plants, the message of non-violence. And ever since my childhood, I've always respected that all life forms are equally important.
The last 10 years saw the culmination of his efforts by remarkably shaping the green movement in India, and his countless admirers began to refer to him as father of green buildings in India. The green revolution he started is the foundation of his legacy. In 2018, Prem Jain Memorial Trust was conceived to carry on his mission and founded upon his values, ideals and vision of a greener Bharat. Today, the Trust enjoys guidance of the best minds of the industry, champions of sustainability, corporate change makers and academicians. PJMT is set on its journey to create, establish and maintain sustainability directions through education, recognition and rewards that nurture future generations.
The best gift you can give to the person is educate him or her. Because then, wherever they are, they will be able to earn and flourish in life.
Each year begins with the Harit Prem Bharat Mahotsav, a week-long celebration of sustainability, and our annual flagship event, Prem Jain Memorial Address. The Trust organizes a spectrum of green initiatives which fill the week of January 26, Dr. Jain's birthday week. The Mahotsav is celebrated across the country with immense enthusiasm by Green Crusaders and our partner institutions through an array of sustainability-driven initiatives and activities. Having deep roots with Indian Green Building Council, the Trust has worked in tandem with IGBC and its chapters. PJMT takes great pride in partnering with esteemed partner societies, corporate leaders, and premier universities across India, working closely with the common mission of creating a greener earth through the year. The Trust is a catalyst for sustainable research and development, sharing innovations and creating a global platform for exchange of thoughts and ideas to nurture future green ambassadors. PJMT has organized more than 300 green initiatives during Harit Prem Bharat Mahotsav in association with its esteemed partner societies, corporates and institutions across India, and arranged over 300 online sessions by distinguished speakers and industry change makers on sustainable built environment, with participation of more than 5,000 students and working professionals. At this edition of Harit Prem Bharat Mahotsav, we invite you to join this green revolution, to build a brighter tomorrow and change the world we will leave behind for our children. If we can change the way we think about buildings, maybe what we build will change the world.
Thank you, Sia. I think a very pertinent message, and I'm quite glad that we are continuing to be part of this dialogue. I think for me, it was a little worrisome, not little, quite worrisome, that the conversation that started in the 70s and we're still grappling with the same issues. And more than ever now, we need to really press the accelerator on our sustainability action. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce the two speakers that we have today. Shobha Raghavan, the Chief Operating Officer of Sahas Zero Waste. She strategizes overall operations to ensure growth and scale up of a very important niche industry. She's been associated with the organization for the last 8 years since its inception and has been constantly evolving various business models as per market demand. An electrical engineer with over 18 years of experience, she's worked in the engineering and IT industry with a strong focus on business, engineering systems, technology. She has completed her 10,000 Women Entrepreneurship course conducted by Goldman Sachs NSRCEL at IIMB and is also a CII certified sustainability assessor. She has been a speaker at various forums organized by Indian Institute of Management Bangalore, EU, the Circular Apparel Innovation Factory, CII, TERI, GIZ, and many more. On various topics around circular economy, recycling economics, way forward for packaging, waste management policies, innovative urban solutions, business models for fostering recycle and material recovery infrastructure. And joining us is also Sean. Sean is the R2 Director with Sustainable Electronics Recycling International, the non-profit organization that administers the Sustainable Electronics Reuse and Recycling, the R2 standard. Sean manages the development and implementation of the R2 standard and works closely with the multi-stakeholder R2 Technical Advisory Committee on updates of the standard. Now, before joining SERI, Sean was director of the Recycler Qualification Office, an organization established to audit and approve reuse and recycling organizations under the industry-led end-of-life electronics recycling programs across Canada. He has also led the development of the Electronics Reuse and Refurbishing Program and the Recycler Qualification Program and served as a member of the R2 Technical Advisory Committee. So, Shobha and Sean, welcome. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. So, Shobha, if I may start with you, right? It would be good for our listeners if you give a little mandate of your organization and the kind of waste streams, that you typically handle, and how do you handle this complex problem of reverse logistics. Whenever we talk about circular economy, I think the first thing that is discussed is reverse logistics. And what happens if you can touch particularly upon the plastic waste that you collect or extract from components, it would be good for our users to know. So, Shobha, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Devyani. Thanks for this platform to discuss a very important burning issue. Regarding the waste streams that we handle, our services help corporates comply with solid waste, plastic waste, and electronic waste management as per the rules of 2016. And we have registered ourselves as an empaneled vendor with the city municipalities and offer MSW, Municipal Solid Waste Services, in closed corporate and tech park campuses for a complete holistic end-to-end zero waste solution till a point of waste certification. We have a pan-India PRO license for offering plastic and electronic waste reverse logistics services as part of EPR for the producers. And we also close the loop. We are a circular economy company, and therefore we also close the loop through our recycled products made out of recycled paper, plastic, textiles. And we also offer consulting services around waste management policies, surveys, and assessments. Coming to the next question regarding the issue and the complexity of reverse logistics. Reverse logistics involves building a network of informal waste aggregators, trusted network of informal waste aggregators across various cities. And there is intense effort to identifying these players, engaging with them to become long-term partners. Regular training on formal processes because they are very used to informal systems. So train them on processes, whether it's data, documentation, labor compliance, or EHS compliance. And these efforts are quite regional and need to be carried out in those cities or states where our producer clients require collections to fulfill their EPR mandates. And identifying authorized recyclers very close to these locations where the material is going to be sourced is very important, and conducting a due diligence on how the recycler operates their infrastructure, their certifications is very important to ensure seamless movement of electronic waste and ethical processing of electronic waste. And coming to your the third part of the question regarding plastics that come out from the extraction of electronic waste, e-waste recyclers we work with have downstream partners who are plastic recyclers, and most of these plastics, be it ABS, HIPS, PS, or PP, most of the plastic grades are around this. They may or may not have BFR on it, and recycling of these are mostly not integrated into the e-waste recycling facilities. Most of this plastic from the e-waste is just shredded and handed over to informal recycling, where it is then converted into pellets in a very impure form, and sometimes even it is in a mixed plastic form. So that is the current situation here in India.
Thanks, Shobha. I think you touched on some very important things that, the informal network, because we know that's a reality and that's a very strong source of livelihood. So how do we work? And it's a very well-connected network, right? So how do we work? And the word trusted, that, while we work with the informal sector, the trust, the training, and you also touched upon the recyclers and certification. And I think that ties in very well for me to bring in Sean into the conversation. Right. And Sean, SERI is a globally recognized standards organization. And can you, just like Shobha did, but briefly explain the overall goals of SERI and how the R2 standard helps in achieving those goals. And does the R2 standard, because Shobha just mentioned that at present the e-waste recycling is not really looking at plastic or does not have plastic integrated, does the R2 standard deal specifically with plastic? So Sean, it would be great to hear from you.
Thanks, Devyani. So we're a small organization. We have a staff of 7. I'm based in Canada, as Devyani has indicated, and the rest of our staff in the United States. And so even with that, what I would say is we do have a wide global reach. We have nearly 1,000 R2 certified recyclers around the world right now. So our mission is broad globally. And really, the focus is on sustainable reuse and recycling of used electronics. So we want to provide the tools, the resources to help make that happen. There's a couple of key areas that would really focus or key components of this. The first is really minimizing negative environmental health and safety impacts that really are related to the used and end-of-life electronic processing processes. So pardon me, this can be the dumping, landfilling, any improper handling really that would lead to pollution, the health risks that we see. So minimizing those negative impacts. But then the second part of the mission really is on the positive side and trying to maximize the positive social impact associated with used electronics. So this is really getting used electronics through the reuse chain, having them repaired, ensuring they're functional so that we don't have used devices just going straight to end of life or sitting in closets and drawers and in back cupboards. We want to get them into the hands of users that may not otherwise have access to some of those devices, particularly at a new price or a new price point. And so the reuse aspect is very important as well. So I think for us, what's often referred to as e-waste, broadly, we consider that a resource. That's what we're trying to maximize, is that as a resource throughout the entire chain. And one of the key ways that we do that is through the R2 standard. So the standard sets the minimum environmental health and safety requirements, also data security requirements when we're processing and handling these devices. We want to ensure that they're safe, secure, it's handled in a sustainable manner. And as part of that, we have what we call focus materials. So this is circuit boards, batteries, CRT glass, mercury, and polychlorinated biphenyls. So some common elements to electronic devices that are either hazardous or typically have hazardous processes associated with them. And so those require a higher level of care. And that's in part what the standard does, is ensure that there's suitable controls around processing and recovering of those items. Now, although plastics and some other materials may not be considered focus materials, they may not require that extra health and safety type handling or environmental handling, they still need to be managed in a sustainable manner. And so everything within an electronic device needs to be handled in accordance with what we call the hierarchy of responsible management strategies. So that is reuse of devices and components first. When the device or its components themselves are no longer suitable for reuse, then we look to direct those items to materials recovery. And all of these items are intended to be recovered wherever we can to the maximum possible. And only when we've exhausted all those options could we consider something like disposal. So following the hierarchy, the key is everything in the device needs to be managed properly. We're not looking at getting the valuable items out and then dumping or leaving the rest. It's really managing everything sustainably.
Thanks, Sean. I think that was quite helpful. And I think that element of reuse that you talked about, I think that's also very important. And I think, Shobha, you'll agree, it also becomes very important in our current context, where in education, right, when we have moved to online education, for example, we are feeling the need that a lot of children are also falling out of the whole net of education because of no access to hardware, either internet connectivity or even the hardware. And this whole element of reuse that you talked about, I think it has so many far-reaching implications, right? And it's interesting to hear about your whole approach, the hierarchical approach on looking at reuse and recycling, and then finally looking at disposal. And I think the need to perhaps look at plastic also, though not as plastic, but every element to the extent possible to be handled in, as proper a manner as possible. So I think that is really important to keep in mind. So, Shobha, if I can come back to you, and you talked about this, that you're a closed loop organization, the closing the loop, and this has become more mainstream. Organizations are beginning to recognize the merit in recovering their materials, or keeping a closed loop. And we also see large investments that are coming into the recycling space. However, we always do have this challenge that some key stakeholders would also push back at the same time because the time is never right. Somehow sustainability, I think, is always decoupled from the whole business strategy, right? And it's felt that first, let's be economical, let's look at our processes, and that, it is not the right time, citing the poor health of the sector, forcing many recyclers to rethink their own plans and targets. So, what are your thoughts on this?
So, first of all, I think it's a no-brainer that in the coming years we are going to see a pandemic because of waste. We are polluting the air, we are polluting the water, we are polluting the soil, and all this is related to our daily life. The food cycle is going to get affected, the water cycle is going to get affected, the air is already affected. So there is no shortcut to solving this hazardous impact on environment and society due to the mounting e-waste issue and irresponsible behavior of the society consumer. The carbon footprint due to manufacture of electronics can nowhere be netted off by recycling. And hence, circular economy is one big step forward to reinforce material recovery and bring back materials into the mainstream supply chain of production and thus reduce natural mining. Investments need to come into the recycling industry to bring in technology that can ensure more purified recovery of materials with least environmental hazards and safe working conditions for the workers. And one important thing to understand is it is not the question of ROI, return of investment. It is a question of return of environment, ROE. So we need to change the language. It is a big fight, but if we don't do it today, we are going to lose out on the environment.
Thanks, Shobha. Some, I think, very strong messages. One, that we need to keep reinforcing, the role of the consumer, and that all of us have to be part of this conversation, right? It is not just that the recyclers will have a solution, but I think the whole way we consume what we are asking for in our manufacturing, look for longer life, right? We have also got used to replacing. I mean, we had a repair culture, and I think somewhere that has got replaced by a replace culture, that it's easier to just upgrade or replace than to try and look for a repair or reuse, and I think that's a very important thing. But I also appreciate your point. And in fact, that was a question I had, that the investment into technology, right, that helping the recyclers to recover better and to make that material recovery as best as possible, I think is also quite important if we are looking at effective e-waste management strategies. So thank you so much for that. And Sean, in your experience, right, what challenges do the electronic industry stakeholders face when it comes to handling plastic waste? I think Shobha alluded a bit to that, that there really is not much happening and it tends to get clubbed. And have you come across any challenges unique to India? Because you do have certified recyclers here, whether it be in terms of policy or operations that they have vis-a-vis other countries. Given your global approach, is there something that you see different in other countries on how they manage their waste streams? I think that could be a great learning point.
Yeah, when I think of electronics and plastics, I think there's two primary challenges that come to mind. And the first is the term plastic is just very broad. It's a wide range of materials. So when we think of electronic devices, we have many different types of polymers that can be used. They all serve different purposes, whether we have plastics used for their strength, for their flexibility, maybe it's lightweight properties. And so when we say plastic, it's not just one thing, and we have to remember that. It's not like copper or aluminum or steel, which are much easier to identify and to separate. And so having said that, I think really that is the second challenge, is these devices contain all of these different or many of these different varieties of plastic or polymers. And so identifying them and separating them can be a real challenge. That's probably the biggest challenge. And so sometimes it's not even just the identification, but they can be fused together. Or as Shobha had indicated earlier, there's other additives, flame retardants and things like that, that can really impact the ability to recover them or even their use afterwards. And so I think there's some real challenges on just identifying those, separating those out. There's a lot of plastics in it, but getting uncontaminated material streams from the electronics devices is really a big challenge. And so what I would say, the good news is that you're not in it alone. This isn't a unique regional problem. This is absolutely a global problem, and it's in electronics around the world, and the processors have the same challenges as well. So one thing I like to say to people is don't make the problem worse than it needs to be. So by that, I mean, if there are easily identifiable plastics that can be separated out, that can be recovered, let's do that. Let's take that out and have the processes in place to do that. So sometimes what we find is, particularly when people get into shredding of electronics, everything goes in the shredder and then you deal with the result after that. And that's a lot more difficult to deal with than obviously separating out small pieces. So once we've done that, there are solutions out there. There's technology out there that can do some identification, separation of plastics, but it requires investment. There's a lot of time, there's a lot of money involved in doing that. So we have to consider, where we have the resources, can we do that? And what I do like to tell people, and just from my experience, is even though the technology's out there, I think there's some very specialized operation required with some of this technology in order to get it to work effectively and to the way that we want with that level of recovery. So we can't just expect to buy a machine and it's going to magically do it for us. So I think, there's a lot of lessons learned out there. There's a lot of regions, organizations that are doing different things with it, can recover plastics, but the challenge is there's a cost to doing it still. And so we have to get that and that understanding of paying for this. Policy can be very important. You asked about regionally, what can we do? I think sometimes we have to look at how we support the industry. If disposal continues to be the easiest and the cheapest option, then that's going to happen. If we want to build a vibrant recovery industry, then we have to lead towards that and not allow disposal of items just because it's cheaper. So I think recognizing that there's a cost to doing it right, recognizing that there are best practices out there like the standard to help set the baseline for organizations so that they're all meeting these same requirements, and really then ensuring through some other policy tools, regulation enforcement, that people are doing what they should be doing to properly handle all the materials.
Thanks, Sean. I mean, I'm really liking this conversation, both from you and Shobha, right? Because I think the messaging, Shobha, I quite like the return on environment. I think very important when we ask people to make choices, right? That not everything is measured in economic terms, right? It is the choices that you make. What does it mean for the environment? And I think it's high time that people are educated about that and take that. And Sean, I think I really liked what you said that solutions are out there. But I'll not repeat the points that you made, some great points. But what also came to mind when you said that the plastic is fused together, and this goes back to the conversation when we look at circularity, can we go back to the design stage and start also design our electronics such that it's easier to recover the materials, right? And this is a conversation. So it needs to go across the stakeholders, that the recyclers have to function better. If recovery has to be better, then somewhere perhaps we need to start making the intervention at the design stage itself, right? And that policy, that unless you put a strict ban on certain things, that disposal is not the way to go, perhaps we will not have that investment or mind space going into looking for solutions of doing the right thing, right? So like you said, that as long the cheapest option is the worst option, that is what people are perhaps going to opt for, right? So policy there would play a great role. So Shobha, just if I can wrap up the conversation in terms of how can the government and the manufacturers and brands, because these are some very key stakeholders, what support can they extend to make electronics and plastic recycling more prominent in India? and to create the last mile collection infrastructure, both from individual and bulk consumers. Because I think, I mean, as an individual consumer, I think I still struggle with proper e-waste disposal, and reaching out. And Sean, like you said, even being able to donate my used hardware, where I know that it could actually be repaired and taken. So, what can be done by the government and manufacturers? One, to increase the recycling, and also to look at the collections much better.
Yeah. So, two things come to my mind. One is awareness, and the second is building the ecosystem infrastructure. Because the manufacturers have built the product, they have the know-how to also help in building the repair and refurbish system, and also giving the technology for advanced recycling infrastructure. As much efforts are being spent in sale of products through various medias and channels, similar efforts on awareness programs for the end consumer on responsible disposal of end of life products is required. Deposit refund schemes, which is a globally renowned system or mechanism, has to get implemented, and that pushes the customer to hand over the gadgets to the nearest authorized service center or collection center. Now, collection boxes at RWAs, communities, large neighborhood retail supermarkets can be promoted to ensure easy access to disposal. And this has to be, of course, doubled with aggressive collection and reverse logistics systems. However, the most important change we need to make is a huge mindset transformation among the consumers to not get paid for the electronics waste at a price that would destroy the environment and create informal working conditions and exploit child labor. Repair and refurbish needs to take prominence before recycling. And for this, a robust infrastructure with certified processes and skilled manpower needs to be built by the producer in partnership with the industry. And this will help bridge the huge digital divide in India and also help in social inclusion in the race to digitization. It's also a huge employment generator. And government and industry also need to partner to demonstrate the feasibility of a circular model for the plastics supply and value chain. They have to develop a grading system for recycled plastics, which will ultimately serve to provide the necessary guidelines for designing new electronic products. And finally, they have to involve green public procurement initiatives and also build large consumer awareness campaign as they build circularity into their products.
Thanks, Shobha. I think a lot of food for thought and a lot of need for action, right? And like I said, as I would like to think I am one of the more aware consumers, but I still struggle with proper disposal. I mean, when we came into our apartment complex, we actually had to suggest to the RWA that why don't you put collection mechanisms for the e-waste? You have like 700 households here, and as a consumer, it's not very easy. I've tried to dispose of my e-waste. You have to go through a very longish process if you're trying to do it online. So I think also making it a little easy for the customer. But I think some of the issues that you highlighted, child labor, the health hazards, the informality of it, they have to be brought to the forefront, right? And typically I'm told as a consumer that I don't get paid for my e-waste. I should actually be paying for the collection of my e-waste, because it requires a lot to safely dispose of the e-waste. And I think that awareness needs to come in, and that story needs to be built. But I think some great suggestions, and we'll definitely see how we can work together to actually have some of these implemented. Or even like you said, you tie up with the municipality, a very important stakeholder in the whole collection process. So that is there. But I think I kind of agree with your point on consumer awareness. It comes to mind that when I used to go use the metro, and it's as busy as it can get, they had a collection center for used mobiles. So there would be a person standing there and say that you could sell your mobile if it's no longer in use, or if you have it. But I hardly saw anyone use it. So I think there was also a lack of trust that I don't know this person, I don't know this company, I don't want to hand over my phone. And I think a point that Sean had made, maybe about data privacy, that I find it much easier to leave it in my drawer than to pick up my phone and give it to somebody who's standing to collect it there and refurbish and perhaps reuse it. So long road ahead, but I think we need to start the journey definitely. And Sean, just a question for you to wrap up, that the government has announced large incentives for the electronics sector, manufacturing, consumption, disposal of electronics is just going to boom. It's going to go through the roof now, in the next 5 years. So what are SERI's plans, to increase stakeholder awareness and onboard more recyclers? And what kind of support would an organization like SERI need from other ecosystem players, let's say like the civil society?
Yeah, so part of our work really involves education, and it's educating all of those in the industry about best practices and also how to achieve those. And so we have a variety of resources online on our website, training videos to guidance documents for understanding the requirements of the standard and then how to meet them. And so that's really intended to help on the implementation side, those that are actually processing the electronics, and anybody can use those whether they're certified or not. So this is part of that broader mission of education and awareness and getting people to do the right thing. So I encourage people to take a look there at our website. We have a knowledge base that has a load of information on there that can be helpful. So in addition to that, specifically for India, we're starting to look at a new project we've initiated with the Center for Responsible Business, actually, and they're helping us to lead this. And really, it's about identifying stakeholders in the electronics recovery industry. Identifying, so the way that we look at stakeholders is the facilities that would be processing the electronics, whether it's reuse or recovery, the customers of those services. So whether it's the manufacturers, the producer responsibility organizations, and then the others, the regulators, the academia, the auditors and consultants that are out there. So really looking at the entire industry and saying, what really is the landscape right now in India? How are electronics being handled? Where are they going to? So helping better understand that landscape can help us better understand how we can support and resource and provide solutions to the industry. So, understanding if there's gaps right now that are preventing some industries or some operations from becoming R2 certified, because we think that would be a good step for the industry to get recognized and demonstrate that they're meeting standards. So I don't know what the exact result of that work is going to be at the end of the day, but I think the important thing is that it's going to demonstrate and it's going to be targeted to the Indian region and to the industry that's happening there currently. So that's important. The other thing that I would mention that we're doing is working with an accreditation body in India and trying to add another accreditation body. So as our standard really started in the United States and North America, we're heavily resourced here now with certification bodies, but other regions don't have that same access to local certification bodies, to local auditors sometimes. And so getting increased resources on that side would help as well. So we really want, from an operational point of view, to have better local resources. So I think those are a couple of key projects that we're working on right now, trying to expand the reach and trying to ensure that R2 is accessible in India. Now, you also mentioned something about support and how can others in the industry support. And I think really that is the key word, is support. This can't happen on its own, and we can't expect the industry just to start recovering and managing sustainable electronics if it isn't supported by all those different players. And this is why this multi-stakeholder approach is really important. It's not just about getting certified. It's where's the market for the facility to get certified, because we know, and as I said earlier, there's a cost to doing it right. And if we expect facilities to meet these higher level requirements to recover the materials that they should be recovering, there's going to be a cost to that. So you mentioned it earlier as consumer practices, and what are we doing when we're buying devices, and are we buying things that are longer lasting, more durable products so we can extend their life or have a longer lifespan, and then are we considering reuse? So things like that from a consumer point of view, being an educated and a green consumer is really going to be important. When we're done with our devices, even are there the ability, or are we handing those over to be reused? Are we giving that second life to those devices? And I think in terms of other generators, we look at the larger generators, which are, the business sources and things like that. And often we make investment in devices, and we may want to turn over our IT devices, for instance, every couple of years to refresh them. We can't just think of that as, we want to squeeze every last bit out of that investment, because if we're trying to go to that lowest cost solution again, it probably isn't going to be the safest one. It isn't going to be the best solution sustainably. What are we doing about our data? Is that going to be a risk? And are we just putting ourselves at risk for other potential issues like data breaches? So making the investment, ensuring that it's being handled properly. The processes themselves really can make the investment and have to do that in those processes to demonstrate they're doing it properly. But it's ensuring that they've got that supply, that stream of material coming in, and that financial incentive to do that as well. And I think lastly, really, it's that group of the regulators and what they represent, and positive policy to drive change, to drive support for sustainable practices. Again, if it's easier and cheaper to dispose of things, if there aren't landfill bans for electronics, if there aren't producer responsibility type programs for collection and getting other stakeholders involved, then we're going to really have some challenges trying to drive this, I think, from a user point of view. So really, support is all of the different stakeholders, and I think a shared approach on this is really critical.
Thanks, Sean. I think that ties in it really nicely. So I think in our brief conversation, we did touch upon all the stakeholders. So this is a complex problem. I think I'm taking a positive note that solutions are out there. There are organizations like Saha Zero Waste which are working on it, right? And you've got a good network in place. We've got R2 certified, which is showing you a way on, what a good recycling looks like. And I think we, in our conversation, yes, the government, the consumers, the brands, but also financing. Sean, you touched upon financing. That financing has to be made available. And I think what we need to do is perhaps also start making that investment and understanding where the risks are of not doing the right thing, right? So it's not just making the investment, but also understanding, because the risks are high of not doing the right thing today. So I think yes, it is a worrisome situation. Yes, we need to act now. The good thing is solutions are there. People are beginning to collaborate, and we need to really step up on that. And this is an area that remains very close to CRB's mandate, and we will continue to work with partners like Sahas, with SERI, and take this conversation as far as possible and as long as possible. So thank you both so much. I think a great conversation on a Friday evening, lots of food for thought, and let's stay in touch. So take care. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Take care.
See you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.